essence of a time has a significant impact on the law, which by and large reflect in the changing scenario. And this session, we are going to talk about emerging areas of law and its future relevance, for which we have a very distinguished panel. We have Mr. Ayush Rastogi, Professor Advocate Uma Mahesh, and our third panelist is Advocate Namit Saxena. So, to begin with felicitation of our esteemed guest, the panelist, I would like to call Ms. Shivangi Paliwal from National University Jodhpur to felicitate Advocate Uma Mahesh. To felicitate Advocate Namit Saxena, I would like to call Barun Datta from Rajiv Gandhi National Law University, Patiala. To felicitate Mr. Ayush Rastogi, I would like to call Rachit Agrawal from NLU Assam. Rachit Agrawal from NLU Assam. It's a esteemed pleasure and honor that in this session we have three distinguished panel. To begin with introduction, I would like to first introduce Mr. Ayush Rastogi. Mr. Ayush Rastogi is a law graduate from Ram Manohar Lohia National Law University this year. He is the founding director, Adhyan Foundation for Policy and Research, an independent Uttar Pradesh-based think tank dedicated to producing quality research to help in formulation, assessment, and implementation of public policies. He has also been closely working with Dr. Anil Rajput, India's member to the International Law Commission, and has assisted him at the session of ILC in Geneva. Our second guest panelist is Advocate Namit Saxena of Supreme Court of India. Sir has written for many newspapers such as The Pioneer, Deccan Herald, Times of India. Sir has also authored books such as Code of Criminal Procedure, Ratan Lal and Dheeraj Lal, many of which have witnessed in the law schools, and Civil Procedure Code, Pollack and Moore, which is noted cited authority in the law schools, and in our moot court we also cited that. So our third guest is Advocate Uma Mahesh. Advocate Uma Mahesh graduated from Rajiv Gandhi National Law University, Patiala. He was awarded Chancellor Gold Medal by Honorable Justice A.K. Sikri for the best overall performance in BA LLB Honours, and KTS Tulsi Gold Medal for Criminal Procedure Code. He obtained his master's degree from the renowned University of Oxford. In 2016, he was awarded the British Channing Scholarship to study LLM in Computer and Communication Law at Queen Mary University of London. Advocate Uma Mahesh has also served as an adjunct faculty of School of Law, Christ University, and the visiting faculty at Rajiv Gandhi National Law University, Patiala. He was an advisor to the Chancellor School of Law, Alliance University, Bangalore. So I would like to start the discussion with Mr. Ayush Rastogi. As we all know, policy formulation has an integrative and interdisciplinary relationship with the law, and Mr. Rastogi has a pragmatic aspect and pragmatic experience too. So I would like to call or request Mr. Ayush Rastogi to begin the session.
A very good evening to all. Namit sir, Mr. Uma Mehta. So, when I was called upon to talk about law and policy, I was in two minds about what to talk to you here. So, the basic thing that I actually tried and wanted to talk to you about is how I stumbled upon it in the first place. You don't see a lot of people graduating from national universities working in the policy sector the moment they get out. But that was something I got into. Till my third year of law school, I was very interested in coming somewhere near here, studying in Mukherjee Nagar and preparing for civil services. I wanted to be a part of that system that was framing policies for this country. Later, while working, while through my internship experiences and through sessions we used to organize, I met a lot of people, including Dr. Rajput, Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar, Mr. Sushil Pandit, and I had long conversations with them. In those conversations, I realized one primary thing, and that was that there are a lot of ideas existent around us. Everyone thinks that they offer some part of a solution. But the implementation of that solution that people think that they have is something that is missing. So then it led to a conversation with my vice chancellor about how there's a dearth of policy making in this country. The policy makers of this country are the civil servants, primarily. And who these civil servants are? These civil servants have been trained in a particular manner, which was prescribed initially by the Britishers in a British-kept system, where it was thought that it is perfectly fine to rule these people and this system will help us rule them, rather than govern them. The change that happened later was that we were supposed to be governed rather than be ruled. And the bureaucratic system wasn't able to adjust itself to the changes that came later. So, to give you an example about how this bureaucratic system is, I was supposed to go and work for Dr. Rajput at the International Law Commission. So I met a very senior Indian Foreign Services person, and I happened to know him by some personal contact. So I was having a conversation about him. He asked me, what are you doing these days? I told him, I'm very passionate about international law. I'm going to the International Law Commission. I think that whatever we do at ILC actually makes a change towards greater policies shift that happens, and that leads to us bringing some real international law. This is something, and international law is something that is a complete hoax. And the foreign ministry doesn't believe in it. हमारा मानना है कि what we foreign law is international law is something कि अगर हमें follow करना होगा तो करेंगे, नहीं करना होगा तो नहीं करेंगे. All these experts that come from outside don't put in any value addition. So I had a long conversation about it with him. And I told him, sir, no, there are issues involved in it. There's so much international trade happening. There are bilateral investment treaties. There is everything. So he told me, okay, there are bilateral investment treaties. There are ways to tackle arbitration. But if the Supreme Court doesn't want to follow them, can anyone stop the Supreme Court? And Supreme Court had in the past had come up with certain judgments that weren't so accommodating of the international law regimes. So, but and that was the only reason I'm highlighting this story to you, is to show the point of view these civil servants of the bureaucracy, the framers of this policy making in India, have about the outside expertise that comes in. And that is where the major chunk of the problem lies. That is, because of this attitude, people don't want to enter that area as well, because they think that they don't have any scope in that area, because whatever they do, irrespective, is not heard. But in recent years, as we see, this is changing a lot. We see a lot of outside experience coming in and flowing and working at the ground level. So I'll give you one small example about how changes happen. So Chandrababu Naidu's previous government was working in Andhra Pradesh, and they had some problems with the implementation of the Rural Health Mission. They couldn't decipher why there was a long losses of life that were happening because of some administrative hurdles that were happening. So what they did was that they hired an outside neutral public policy think tank to look into it. That think tank got 500 doctors, flew in 500 doctors, and checked what all issues were happening. What it led to was a 50% downfall in the deaths that were happening in the government hospitals in that time frame. So you could see actual policy changes happening because of a public policy think tank coming in and working in it. And then in recent years, we have seen a lot of big think tanks coming in. For example, the Vidhi Center for Policy and Legal Research. So what Vidhi Center has done is commendable work in the area. Now, what this does for us is it establishes a discourse on policy matters that the government is not touching right now, or the government think that there is no consensus on them, or no one is actually worrying about them, so there is no intent on even our part to look into it. So they change it through that. Now, the problem with bureaucracy is twofold. Firstly, it's the lackadaisical attitude that the bureaucratic system in itself has. That this is not my work, why should I do it? That this is not supposed to be done by me, I am not responsible for this. So what they do is that they give it to someone else. So there is an English TV show called Yes Minister. I don't know how many of you have seen it. But in that there's a minister called Jim Hacker. Every year he wants to bring in some new policy changes, something new, and he thinks that I'll achieve this. And his secretary is Mr. Sir Humphrey. So Sir Humphrey and Jim Hacker are having a conversation about the policies and the implementation of it. So Sir Humphrey is asked, what do you think your job is? So he says that my job is to carry out government policy. So Jim Hacker asks, even if you think that it's wrong? He says, especially when I think it's wrong. Because my work is only related to its implementation. And frankly, sir, I think all government policies are wrong. But you will have to agree that their implementation is perfect. So Jim Hacker says that if you're not passionate about the policies, how do you think about implementing them? So he says, sir, I have been here in this position for 30 years and have seen 11 governments. Had I been passionate about it, I would have been passionate about opening the markets and at the same time been passionate about closing them. So I can never be passionate about any government policy. So that is what actually happens in this bureaucratic system. That passion to bring in that change is not existent per se, because they have no incentive to do that. And even if you think that your minister or the person that you eventually elect can change it, then it doesn't. And that's why there was a major overhaul in this complete bureaucratic system that even UK did at a later stage when they realized that, yes, this system's not working for us. But that major shift and major overhaul has never happened in this country. And now, the other problem that exists, and that other problem being the kind of public policy or the civil society that we had been building in this country for so long on. So we have a very wrong habit, and that wrong habit is a depiction of Western ideas and Western philosophies. But mind you, we only depict those policies that are inherently wrong. So when you see, with respect to public policy, the kind of Western depiction that we have done, the Western depiction that we have done in our policy is not to ensure that the civil society and the public policy groups are able to influence policy to the extent that they do it in Western countries. What we influence, or what we got influenced and what we aped was the kind of policies that they used to follow. Whatever is good for America must be good for us. So what we did, and you can look for examples for it. For example, we came up with the idea that more insecticides, and when I give you an example of agriculture, for example, that when you bring in more insecticides, more pesticides, the yield would be higher. And you thought that chemicals were the answer for it. 30 years down the line, we realized that's not the case. We are going back to that old techniques that we used to have, and even the West is going towards that. So what we had initially could have worked had we brought modified changes according to our own system, rather than aping what they have. and later on regretting and realizing what is wrong. So that is where it becomes wrong. And the dearth of public policy or people or graduates working in public policy right now we have is that all the policy framework that happens, it's not nationalistic oriented. It's not looking at the needs of the nation. And what they don't even look at, and I'm sorry if I say that, and it might go against a lot of big people, but the thing is that they're more interested in increasing their academic writings than influencing the actual policy. So of most of the reports of think tanks that come out, you will see that most of them were written in the drawing rooms, rather than looking at what kind of implementation is happening at the ground level. It's very easy to write research papers sitting in our drawing rooms and thinking that this is the way that we should be going forward. But until and unless you are able to experience and you are able to see and have empirical data to support whatever you are professing, it becomes really difficult. And what we end up doing because of it is that we end up, even when we are influenced or even when the government is influenced by these public policy pressure groups, is coming up with wrong decisions or decisions that don't really help us in this nation uplift. So, lastly, why should we choose this and what is the way forward about going it? See, there are a lot of things that we as law students can do in our life, and there are a lot of avenues available to us. But this avenue is something through which you make real changes or you help in starting discourses that no one ever thought would actually happen. You will be working at policy part and helping this country to go forward. And even if, and mind you, you might think that I'll become a civil servant, part of that system, change it, I'll bring in new ideas. But understand it is not the person sitting in that position who is wrong and who doesn't want certain changes to be brought in. It is the entire system structure that is such that doesn't allow outside interference to happen in the first place, and thus you can't actually influence any particular ministry that you become a part of. Because in 6 months you will be transferred to a completely different ministry not knowing anything about it. So that is how you do it. And I think that anyone who wants to make certain changes in society and wants to go forward about it needs to do and come in this sector, because always remember one thing, that any sector that you choose or any life choice that you make shouldn't be made depending upon what that sector is doing at this particular point of time. That decision should be also made thinking that what will happen in the next 10 years in that sector. And when these policy changes are shifting and the attitude of the governments is also shifting towards it, that means that there is a lot of scope opening up in public policy for us to really work upon. And especially at the state levels, all these big NGOs and big pressure groups that you see only work at Delhi. They don't work at local state centers. And if you talk to any civil servant, they'll tell you that all the implementation happens in states. So we have policy coming up in Delhi while the implementation is supposed to happen in Lucknow. So there is that whole gap of what is supposed to happen at the ground level and what are the realities at the ground level, and thus making it difficult. With that thought, I leave you all and think that some of you will also make a life choice thinking that public policy is the way forward for you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us about the impact of think tank and policy formulation, especially in the pragmatic sense. The second segment of our panel discussion is the new avenues of litigation, for which we have Namit Saxena, Advocate Namit Saxena. I would like to call Namit Saxena for this session.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I'll just add to what Mr. Rastogi, discussed with and shared with you. So he discussed at length what policy is and how, how you should deal with policy or public policy per se. There's just one angle to it. With his permission, I'll just add. How do you amend a policy? Once a policy decision comes out, how do you amend it? There are two popular ways. One is by the legislature itself or by judiciary. So legislature also, it can be done by the same ruling establishment. They can withdraw it or they can amend it. Or another popular mode is when the ruling establishment changes, so they alter it and mold it, according to their own whims and fancies. Now, when it comes to, for example, if you have, like for example, in UP, there are policies which deal with sugar establishments, sugar industries. So if the previous ruling establishment made a policy favoring a certain category of sugar industries, the new government comes and says that, okay, no, this is tailor-made, this can't continue, and we'll bring out some changes or we'll withdraw it and come out with new policies or with new surcharges or orders. So when it comes to judicial review of policies, there are three basic principles which you should know. One, judiciary says that we should not interfere, we won't generally interfere in economic policy decisions or decisions which have large implications on finances or economies of a particular state or of the country as such. Second, if a policy is tailor-made to suit certain corporate or business houses, then it has to go, it can't be tailor-made. And third, that the judiciary generally refrains itself from entering into the field of legislature or executive and step into their shoes, because when Parliament passes something, it is debated, it is tabled, it is debated, it is discussed, and then it gets passed. And Supreme Court says that, constitutional courts, because high courts under 226 can also do so, they should generally interfere a legislature which has come through the normal process of Parliament. This is what I wanted to add to law and policy. So I'll discuss with you new avenues of litigation. Now, conventionally speaking, litigation was primarily civil and criminal. Civil is, in Hindi, it's called Diwani. Criminal is called Fauzdari. And criminal was initially defined as whatever is not civil is criminal. So before Section 9 of CPC 1908 came, because Section 9 defined what is a civil, dispute per se. Property disputes, family issues, all these come into the larger gamut of civil law. Rest everything was considered to be under criminal law. Now, with the advent of the Constitution, and we have Article 13 in the Constitution established by law, and already existing legislative enactments. So, advent of Constitution in 1947 and 1950, because few sections came in 1949, few articles came in 1949. So, it changed the way conventional laws were looked into. Then immediately and interestingly, because the Constituent Assembly passed the Constitution in 1950, and the first Lok Sabha elections were conducted in 1952, and the first constitutional amendment came in 1951. So the very same Constituent Assembly which passed the Constitution amended it for the first time just 1 year after it came into existence in 1951. And with the first ruling establishment being of Mr. Nehru, because it's his memorial we are sitting in, he brought in a lot of changes in land reforms. So the conventional litigation, which, primarily was only civil and only that you commit a crime also defined in IPC that was made way back in 1860 or certain other statute books. And then, then you proceed further. So that changed for the first time with the advent of the Constitution. The second major change came in 1973 when the Code of Criminal Procedure was amended. Before that, Criminal Procedure Code 1898 was followed. And in the 1898 code, the prosecutor could have been the advocate as well. The investigator could have been the prosecutor as well. This was completely done away with, and it was held that that the investigating agencies can't be the prosecuting agencies. Prosecuting agencies have to be completely separate because they have to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. Then later on, a lot of other changes came. So how, also it is very important to know how as to, when do new avenues in litigation pop up or crop up. Now, new avenues in litigation come, number one, when there is a demand from the society. Now, the society, for example, I'll take a very recent examples of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. So, since 2010 onwards, when the property rates of real estate were shooting up, a lot of people invested in real estate. A lot of people invested because the economy was, shown in a certain way that, this is the investing time after 2008 recession, that you should invest in, a lot of activities now in gold and other, investments as well. Then somehow real estate market broke down. Now the property, now for example, if you bought a flat in Noida or you booked a flat in Noida in 2011 for rupees 1 crore then, now today its value is not even 60 lakhs. I'm just, taking a very broad example. Now the demand came when the ruling establishment changed in 2014 that, that there has to be a dedicated, a dedicated statute book which says that if, and there were also a lot of debt-ridden companies, debt-ridden individuals, debt-ridden companies, corporate loans and all were also there. So the demand came from the society that there has to be a dedicated statute book which says that in case you are not able to pay or repay me anymore because the DRT, the recovery, that restructuring that had failed, then you have to be declared insolvent. And instead of going through the larger and the longer route of official liquidator being appointed, will make a post of resolution professional and he'll declare you insolvent, he'll sell your assets, and whatever is due to everyone will be paid by the resolution professional. This came in 2016 finally. So the first step is a demand from the society. Second step is either amending the existing law or bringing in a new legislation. For example, recently the Parliament amended UAPA Act. Now, that amendment was long due. It came into existence. This is a part of, when you amend the law to suit the requirements of existing times. Second is, for example, IBC, that you bring in a new law, RERA, IBC, a lot of changes. In fact, in criminal law as well, when you change sentencing, for example, since till 2013, the sentencing for commission of a rape was different. Post 2013 it was different. It was again amended in 2018. Second step is change in law. Third step is investigating agencies. For example, before 2014, conventionally speaking, we also have in mind that state police will investigate something. Now we have investigating agencies such as NIA, SFIO, CBI is active, ED is active. There are other investigating agencies also involved. So there are multiple cases. So that concept of, that a traditional investigation will happen and the investigating techniques have also changed. That has also been, changed in a different manner. Then third is establishment of dedicated courts. For example, the Commercial Courts Act came, NCLT came, RERA was made a quasi-judicial authority. Then we have dedicated courts for offenses against, particularly sexual offenses against children. We have dedicated courts for, in certain areas. Now for family courts, it is completely different. Negotiable instruments, promissory notes courts have been made different. So the third arena is infrastructure of courts changing, how courts generally function. There's a dedicated court which will deal with a particular set of cases. Then fourth is appeals, and fifth is when something finally, climbs up the ladder to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gives either an interpretation or directs the central government to do something. Now, interpretation can be, for example, the Supreme Court recently held that, that home buyers will also fall into the category of financial creditors, and they can directly go to the NCLT and say that, okay, my so-and-so claim is pending, and either direct this builder to be insolvent or, let the builder come up with a proposal that how will I revamp myself. Now, this has, flooded NCLT with a lot of petitions by home buyers. This is one. Second is, for example, the Supreme Court directed the central government to make a dedicated law in the triple talaq case. Now, following the dictum by the Supreme Court, the Parliament, in its wisdom, created a statute book for triple talaq, and now we have cases falling under that category as well. Now, broadly speaking, new avenues in litigation which have parachuted themselves from the parliament are insolvency is one. Second, in criminal law, there has been a lot of changes. Now, fast track courts are there. The procedure has been made slightly rigid because we as practitioners, we know that earlier we had, the occasions to have a lot of adjournments. And, if you file a case and the first date is in March, the next date you'll get in December. So till then, the accused can be happy, and, the next date also he can come say, oh, no, I file an exemption, I can't come. That has been done away with. You're getting very short dates now. So there are a lot of changes. Now, few other avenues in litigation which are yet to, topple the way how other things function are one, for example, sports law. Sports law is highly unorganized. And in fact, although I very strongly believe the Supreme Court, that is not the domain of the Supreme Court to enter into, but the Supreme Court is currently administering how BCCI works, how BCCI's officials will be elected, and how, and other cricket bodies as well. And I'm only concentrating to cricket. There are other sports as well which are, directly or indirectly run by the Supreme Court nowadays, or by other constitutional courts, certain high courts as well. That should be done. So sports law is something which needs a revamp, and there is, a lot of scope in it. Secondly, a few existing laws, such as intellectual property. The way we look at intellectual property today is different from what used to happen, a while back when intellectual property was, or, it came into existence. Third can be, for example, white-collar crimes, or crimes committed by individuals who are highly organized, or who are, who commit crimes behind a particular shield. Now, that is something which needs a revamp. Fourth is, nowadays we are having a lot of people who, through the corporate wheel, they do something, they commit a crime, and they tend to flee from the country. That has to be regulated in a slightly better manner. So this will be a new avenue. And then new avenues in litigation, they keep on coming and, keep on decorating themselves with some other thing. Like, I was a science student, so we studied chemistry, we studied physics, and my chemistry teacher used to tell us that, pick a subject, or pick a word rather, and add chemistry as a suffix to it, you have a new branch. So organic, inorganic, nuclear physics, something. So this is how law can also be, new avenues in litigation can come up. My suggestion because you're all young people, my suggestion to you will be that don't bound yourself with the conventional methods of looking at law. Law is very dynamic. Law keeps on changing itself from, as per the demand by the society. And gradually, and this is the mantra which my senior taught me, that you have to question why to everything. You have to question why FIR per se is, the evidentiary value of FIR is very less, why 161 statements can't be used as evidence in the trial. So that why is very important. With that why, I'll leave you with Mr. Uma Mahesh, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for guiding the young budding lawyers about the changing dimension of litigation and how it is being brought by different machinery. We all know technology has impacted our life in a different way, and so what the law too. I would like to request Mr. Uma Mahesh to throw the light on the interface between law and technology. Sir, please.
Thank you. Very good afternoon. I don't think I have to talk on this topic on the day because most of you are engrossed using technology there. Right? Technology has kept you engaged all this while, I could see. Most of your mobile phones are working. You know more on technology front than what I understand, isn't it? I understand very less as compared to you all. But today we are here for a reason. We are trying to look at some avenues in law That is, my predecessors just spoke about some things. They spoke about what are the new avenues that you have and how law interacts with policy. And I think the third wing, which has both, which is an emerging area as well as which has policy implications, would be law and technology. Would you all agree with me on this? Would you all agree with me? How do you say that? Yeah, I know there's a question answer session where you want to question me on. But before that, let me also question you all, because you all don't seem to be engaged. If I understand it right, let's have an interactive session. And you're all students, so I have no hesitation in talking to you. Do you accept this? It has a far greater implication. The legal aspect has far more implications in the arena of technology. Do you accept it? Do you all accept? Yes? Good or bad? I use the word impact, so it has to be good or bad? Both. How? Anyone here can just tell me how it is? Yeah?
Criminal offense. For instance, yesterday morning I got a call saying that my PNB account has been blocked. Please give your account number and EPIN code.
Okay. You gave?
No, first of all,
No, most of us give.
so
Yeah.
first of all, I thought that how is it possible, because I have an account at Axis Bank. Later, to which what-
So you replied to him?
Yes.
Gentlemen, I don't have a PNB account. You can take my Axis account.
somewhat I said yes. So yes, give any account. So I said, are you from Jamtara in Jharkhand? To which that fool said, yes, I'm from Jamtara in Jharkhand. Then I said, thank you, and cut the phone, because Jamtara is known for this cyber crime.
Okay. Probably he thought even you are from the same place.
No, I'm not from Simple.
No, he thought. Okay, anyway. Any other experiences that you have with technology? They were trying to take his financial credentials online. So they were wanting to do something with it. We have some word for it.
I think not only financial services, but also social.
I have one.
Yeah, someone's talking to me. Yeah, please.
Okay. I will tell you.
How many? I think he's like hub of technology there. Yeah, please go ahead.
So this was way back in 2009.
Okay.
I had just created an email account. Me and my younger brother both created an email account. So I think in the month of October itself, we got a message saying that we have won an MSN lottery worth $12 million.
Okay.
And we were asked to give our account number as well as the what you call phone number.
Did you go to receive it?
Let me tell you what exactly happened. So
He has a story to tell. Yeah.
So we gave our address, everything, and almost we gave our account number, which had around 500 rupees as a balance. Now for 6-7 days, we used to dream a lot that what if we get even half of the amount, that we will buy a flat, we will buy a bungalow, something like that.
Yeah.
All four of us, including my parents, because they seem to be too real. We even checked from the Google, we did a Google search, and it seemed to be too real for us.
It does.
So what exactly happened? Now came the glass shattering moment. Then we on
There's
one
some
week,
more left. Yeah.
Then on 1 week later, we got a mail stating that we have to deposit 50,000 rupees.
Okay.
So we understood that it was a fraud.
You only understood then.
Yes. Next 3 days later, we got a call that
He is impatient. Thank you. I'll have a word with you later. See, you have people amongst you talking about certain experiences that they've had while dealing with technology. And the recent episode, which I was about to tell you, one of our former Chief Justice of this country was fooled. And he was sent an email saying that one of your colleagues in the Supreme Court wants money. and please transfer some funds. And I think he was duped up to the extent of 10 lakh or something. It was there in the newspaper, and he was the former Chief Justice of this country. So we keep hearing these issues. This is one aspect. So we always understand ills of technology while you read newspapers. But that's not the only thing that I have come here to talk about. Yes, that aspect is very much there. That's what we are all interested to read or know about. See, that's so interesting to know how your friend was fooled. But at the same time, we are also trying to understand how do we use law as a medium to keep in pace with growing technological advancements. I think that's where our energy is to be utilized more. Yeah, incidentally, there are certain crimes, and crime is prevalent everywhere. Wherever you have some growth and development, crime is incidental and it comes up. And we need to tackle them as well. That is also equally important. But first and foremost, in this country, we have a lot of developments. And you all understand as a law student, I think most of you have this paper in your law schools. They teach you IT Act. Right? They don't tell you why you're reading it. Right? And you talk about cyber crimes, they say IT Act is there. It talks about all offenses. Then your teacher starts in the classroom, she says, no, it only talks about few sections. And few sections are also repealed, few sections are struck down by Supreme Court, you know that, what changes have happened. That's a very small area, but most of you also don't understand that it is the same act that you talk about, the IT Act, is used for e-commerce transaction. Right? So the major role, what we are supposed to do is to keep in our commitment to the United Nations. We wanted to bring some law which is in parlance with an international forum, and that is where we wanted to have some law on e-commerce, electronic commerce, and that is why we enacted this. The major chunk of the act talks about e-commerce, but we conveniently forget what we have to speak about, and we only talk about the crimes, which is incidental, which comes along with the development. So now, when I'm talking to you about these laws, what do you understand? There are two aspects of technology that we always tend to confuse as a student of law. Even I did it. I think most of you would have that confusion or a dilemma. What is that? First and foremost, when we talk about is, one is technology of law. The second would be law of technology. The examples that we all discussed now may be cheating, that is incidental, that's a crime. But when I'm talking about some cyber offenses under the IT Act, all those instances that I gave you is to do with law of technology. But there's one aspect which is also called technology of law, which we all have to understand, that there is something to do, it has nothing to do with law. Even non-law graduates can specialize in this area. For example, I think you had a session in your chart, I could see that. Someone who's supposed to talk to you about startups, right? So that's one area where you have to highlight on, where there's a small aspect within the startup that we now have called legal tech startups. That means they're all technocrats, all technically experienced individuals working in the area of law, right? So they're trying to apply few technological advancements that are now available, which you all call, the big terminologies, I don't want to use them. You call this as artificial intelligence, right? As if it never existed some years back. You use words called IoT, Internet of Things. You use these phrases, this has newly come up now. You use this and you see how these technology can be used in the legal discipline. So that's one area, that's very interesting for most of us because, see, it's an intersection, it's a purely interdisciplinary subject. And most of you would be interested to understand solutions that, you find out solutions for whatever we're facing today in law. It can even be as small as dealing with pendency of cases. There can be some technological interruptions to deal with, to solve pendency issues. So there can be many such interruptions of the technology in the legal arena. So strictly it's not legal, but definitely it has a lot of ramifications in the legal field. The second aspect is law of technology, where I spoke about, and where my predecessors probably highlighted the emerging area is here, where you're talking about policy. There are many areas which we don't talk, but we are all victims to it. Slowly here and there, we all face this problem. So I can briefly tell you, if you've read the newspaper last 3 days back, There was one report of the Jammu Kashmir Juvenile Justice High Court Committee. There was a PL filed in the Supreme Court, right, by a body saying that there are a lot of child rights abuses that are happening in Kashmir, and these children have no access to courts. This is what the context was all about. And then immediately the Chief Justice took the matter seriously. He said the children should never be denied of their right to approach the court. So immediately they said, let's see what has happened. And there were few newspaper postings that were given as part of the petition. They said, these are internationally reported cases of child abuses. And immediately there are serious issues because you're saying a child is locked up here, a child is locked up there, despite we being a country which follows rule of law. And then an order was made to verify what these facts were all about. And they've given, if you just happen to read that article, it's very interesting. They gave a point-wise denial. The High Court committee gave a point-wise denial. They said such instances never existed. And what are they all called then? They said all the reportings that came up, most of them, they said such an incident has never happened. One case, yes, police had detained, but eventually that boy was released. But barring that, there is no such instances that has actually happened. It means these all are fake news. Right? So each and every day when there's some riot somewhere, when there's curfew, when there's some student protest, I think most of the law school students are aware of this protest now. Right? We are very vocal about it. That includes my alma mater. Day 5, we are all on protest. Come help. Day 6, protest is about to start. Everything was live, everything was sent across. When you're trying to do this, I used to get messages. One student has threatened to commit suicide. Then I used to call, who is that? They're like, sir, no one, sir, who will die, sir? They're all happy, sir, having food in the mess. I'm like, okay, thank you. So these are the fake news that keeps coming out. It's between us, and is this not an offense? Do we have any policy in this regard? I think Supreme Court woke up to such news, I think 3 days back. There was one order that was passed. Within 3 months, the central government should come on regulating social media sites. That's one of the aspects that they've told. I'm not going to get into this, but there are enough laws, if you see, to regulate social media. You as lawyers, you have to tell your seniors, whoever they are, making such orders, you have to tell them, gentlemen, there are enough laws in this country to regulate everything. Thing is, you should have a mind and you have to have that will to implement it. Right? So you know where the fake news are coming from. Do we all know the source? Do we all know the source of any fake news that comes up? Is it difficult to find out? It's easy. You know who's bringing up that news. It's fake news, it's defamation, you know who's defaming you. I know better who's defaming me, so I don't need anybody to tell me who's doing that. So in all these cases, these are new areas that have ventured out now. Why is it making it so difficult? It is because of technological interventions that has made it far more difficult to identify the person. Even if you identify the person, the processes are very different. You'll have to bring him to court of law and get him punished. I think that takes donkey years, and you all understand that very well, why I'm talking about it. So these are, again, the other aspects of technology, but when you're talking about technology itself, there's one thing that we all use social media. You have a message written on that WhatsApp messages, right? We use it. I think most of you are using now also while I'm talking to you. What is it written on that? Can you please read? Someone's using it. Tell me what is it written on that? It's encrypted. What do you understand by that? Pardon? Third party can't see. Can't I peep? Even the company can't intercept? Who owns WhatsApp, by the way? Who owns it? Can Facebook read your messages? Yes? Then why are they writing? Is that just a formality? It's just a formality. It's encrypted means nobody will read. That's it. No, that's not the understanding. Do you have any policy for encryption? See, you heard of private and public keys? So it's intended to be used by two people only. Once I say it's encrypted, it can be used only to the people, the end users, the one who's sending and to one whom the message is sent to. Nobody in between, including Facebook or the company it is owning, the WhatsApp, they cannot read your text that you send through WhatsApp messages. That's the position. And I think if you follow it up, this is one of the biggest reasons why United Kingdom came up with, they were thinking of bringing some law asking these companies to share this information. Because post this 2016 London attacks, they never got, all these terrorist messages were through WhatsApp. They never got hold of these messages because while at the time of investigation, they knew who was sent messages, but they exactly did not know what were the contents. So there's a biggest hurdle for them to investigate because they just can't convict anyone based on some accusal. So they had to be having some proof, and which was lacking in that case. So then the government thought of enacting a law where they said, in case of national security, we would force these companies to share these details even though the subject matter is encrypted. But they did not agree to it. Eventually there's a long legal battle that will go on. The same thing will happen here also. Your Facebook chats can be deleted, can be read. They're all surveilled day in and day out. If you all think it is not happening, sorry. So you're all surveilled, right? So if I'm going to read all your messages, what is that called? Intrusion of? Very good. See, what Supreme Court took such long time to even understand that, you all know it now. They needed another 40, 50 years to understand that privacy is a fundamental right. For that, 9 judges sat and gave it. And it was given for what purpose? It was mainly for the purpose of deciding the Aadhaar issue. But while deciding that issue, they said privacy is a fundamental right. Subsequently, we'll decide on Aadhaar. Thanks to them. At least they understood that at least now they have to do this work. But with all good regards, now this is another issue where you'll deal with is privacy, where if you're dealing with companies these days, there are two things that comes up with privacy always. One is privacy and the other aspect is data protection. I think this is what you will want to know more about. Please be prepared. This is one of the areas where if you're looking for jobs abroad, I think most of the countries now have vacancies for data protection officers post implementation of GDPR. I think you understand what GDPR is, right? So post this, now there are going to be vacancies all across the globe because you have to, each and every company which makes use of data from the EU, they have to be compliant with this GDPR laws. And that is why we are also thinking of having one law now. And there is a bill at the moment that is given by Justice Sri Krishna Committee. You all understand that. So this is another potential area of data protection and privacy. So what do lawyers do in this area? One is always go to court and sue Facebook. That's another hefty way of making your income. Always you can go and sue them saying that he's breached my data. So that's litigation aspect. But otherwise, as lawyers, we can also talk about data protection, data privacy audits. These days, this is another new area that they're starting up with, because you see whether each company is compliant with certain laws, which they have to. Most of the companies in India are still using the norms that are used for GDPR. They don't have any customized laws for that particular country, especially like ours where we don't have a law. So till at the moment, most of the countries, if you see, they use the GDPR norms, which is not acceptable because we have our own laws now to come. So then immediately they'll be looking for certain data protection officers for processing certain personal data. So this is another potential avenue that you have to work on if technology is all interests you. So one, I spoke to you about legal tech, using technology in the legal arena. One is again data protection. Then definitely yes, there's going to be a boom in litigation in all the aspects I've told. So one, you can keep your cyber crimes, and I think my speaker who spoke before me, he rightly pointed out, he used the word called white collar, right? So this is also taken care in that part of the litigation, where you're talking about the criminal aspect, where you're talking about criminality. In that area, yes, definitely this will add on. So cyber crimes is also part of it, which is, I think your friend can tell you better, his experiences. And second is, just, last point is cyber security audits, where each company you go in and look at their cyber security compliances, you see whether their systems are well protected and it's not averse to any external attacks. So you just keep them all safe. You're keeping their entire information security system safe. For that, there are certain compliances and there are certain soft laws in that regard. So you go audit and give a report to them, which is legally done. You say you have complied with all so and so, and most of the technology company also does this aspect. There are also a lot of consultancies who do this work. But lawyers now give a small legal report on cybersecurity compliances as regards to certain soft laws. So this is one aspect of laws. It's developing, and I think more support is required in terms of policy. I think days to come, India will keep looking for this, because I think one immediate law that we would also require is in the area of encryption. I just spoke to you about social media encryption. We would want to have some laws to even regulate this aspect. So there are different types of encryption. I think you can go and read it. But please understand, this is nothing like we're telling you something, it's a sermon that you all listen to. Technology is something which affects our daily life, and we are using it on our day-to-day life. But how it impacts us, we need to understand it better. Right? For good or bad, it has both implications, as you rightly pointed out. But see from how far you take it from there. Is that clear? So we'll take up questions from you. I think you would have individual questions. Any new avenues of technology, you're free to question. You can talk to me about blockchain, or you want to talk to me about something. I'm happy to take questions from you. And I think my co-panelists will also be happy to talk to you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for insightful and in a very simplified manner, you have just resolved the interface between the law and technology. So we will begin with the question and answer session. So anyone has questions?